R2v3 read-along webinar series where we go through the core requirements. We read each section and then we discuss different differences between R2 2013 and R2v3, and also some of the either transition best practices or implementation best practices. So what the method is, Asal is going to read the sections and then Mike and I are going to discuss and answer any questions. So let's get started. Asal?
All right, diving right in. So today we're going to be talking about core requirement number 5, tracking throughput. We'll start with the general principle. To track and manage the throughput of all electronic equipment, components, and materials, and maintain sufficient records to document the flow of all electronic equipment, components, and materials. So give us an overview.
So the general requirement isn't really changed here, you know, in the general principle, and that's just to be able to manage how much material is coming in, what you're doing with it, and where it's going to, all the way down to end of life for materials that require traceability to end of life.
Mm-hmm. And as a reminder, what material requires traceability to the end of life?
Focus materials are focus material bearing equipment, or until it gets to the first R2 certified facility or to end of life.
Okay. Okay, so diving.
I would want to say that you also, in terms of tracking throughput, you'll also want to track the devices that you may repair and refurbish, depending
or
on
contain data.
Yeah, depending on what your customer requirements are.
When you want to track throughput for electronics you repair or refurbish, do you track it to the end user or to a retailer?
Exactly. So it can be a retailer. That's fine, as long as you're tracking the serial number and you have the records of a receiving, inspection, and all of the steps that you've taken to either inspect it, refurbish it, repair it. Did you use different assembly, the different parts to assemble, and then the final inspection prior to release to that retailer.
Okay. But if I sell it, if my method is to sell to a retailer and then the retailer goes and sells it to the end user, I don't need to track it all the way to the end user.
No, because you sold a functioning unit.
Okay.
So you don't have to track it down.
Okay, got it. Okay, so 5A. For all inbound electronic equipment, components, and materials controlled by the R2 facility through physical possession, title, or other contractual agreement, the R2 facility shall: 1. Maintain bills of lading or other commercially accepted records. 2. Ensure records have accurate dates, detailed descriptions, including types and quantities and supplier names. And 3. Maintain a summary report of all transactions.
So this is a more detailed requirement than you had under provision 7 of R2 2013. So this first portion A is talking about inbound equipment, right? So the inbound equipment on bill of ladings or whatever method you have of receiving the material, you need to have the dates, which most people have dates. Detailed descriptions. Detailed descriptions is a kind of double-edged sword here. I agree that many R2 facilities might be lacking good detailed descriptions of incoming material. Like, for instance, it might just say like e-waste or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it depends on who you're receiving it from, They might just have unsorted e-waste that they're sending to you, and at the time of receiving, he might not have a more detailed description than that, as well as types and quantities, aside from, one Gaylord box of e-waste that weighs this much from ABC collector. And then a summary report might just be kind of like a receiving log or something in your ERP system or whatever you have to kind of summarize the above information there. I don't think you need to do a summary report that has more than just the dates, descriptions, types and quantities, and supplier names of the material that was received on those days. But, you know, all of this stuff that I'm concerned about, auditors taking this too far in terms of detailed descriptions, saying like this description of your inbound material is not sufficient, or this summary report is not sufficient just to have it in your receiving log. So that's one thing I'm concerned about. So I think really it's a serious job to really train the auditors appropriately on the intent of the standard here to make sure that auditors aren't doing more than what was the intent of the TAC and, you know, making sure that this is done. I have a big problem with this new tracking throughput, especially Section B.
Mike, so I think that in this case, right, so this is something that I'm going to say that I say to all of our clients, right? So you are allowing auditors in your house, right, your operation. At the end of the day, it's up to you to define what your process is, right? And you educate the auditor on what your process is. So your receiving sheet might say a gaylord of e-waste, right? But you can also say that material is not received until it goes through the audit line or until it's sorted, right? So,
yes.
So I agree with Mike. This is a really big requirement, but on the customer side, on the consultant side, right, we can say like, oh, to meet this requirement, we're going to say that our receiving process is this at the dock plus going through the audit line, sorting it out. And that is going to add in the details of what it is in the Gaylord, right? The only little thing where maybe the auditors are going to kind of dig a little bit deeper is how long does it take you to sort out that Gaylord, right? So now we're going to look at the KPIs, key performance indicators. Have you set a KPI that, for example, you're going to, all of the receiving is going to, meaning receiving at the dock and the actual sorting out is going to take you 5 days, right? So if that's the case, right, if I'm coming into your facility as a certification body auditor and I see a Gaylord that just says e-waste, I'm going to accept that because now you have 5 days to actually fully receive it, right? So there are ways that both us as consultants and clients can educate the auditor on what it is, when is it that the equipment is fully received. So I think that is the kind of like a go around and kind of guiding the auditor in your house of what is it that they're auditing.
Yeah, that's very true.
What about if my incoming inbound electronic equipment is from a collection event?
So, I mean, I think that's okay. That's the same, I think.
So what would be like the supplier name?
Sorry?
So for where it says you have to have records, including the supplier name, do I have to record the name of everybody who brings me an electronic part or an electronic?
If you're in California, you have to do that.
For electronic waste.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you are putting on an collection event for your client, then your client is the customer, right? So sometimes what R2 facilities do, they partner up with corporations that put on collection events, right? And then that corporation can be your supplier. Again, unless you are in California or in another state where you actually have to record the name and the address of whoever supplied it to you.
In California, you have to record the name of address for all electronic equipment or just CRT TVs?
Covered electronic waste. So covered electronic waste includes CRTs as well as non-CRT covered electronic devices like laptops, LCDs, plasma TVs, and other video display screens, devices.
Okay. Okay. All right. So moving on to subsection D, I'm going to read the supersections one at a time. So here we go. For all electronic equipment, components, and materials controlled by the R2 facility, the R2 facility shall, 1, track, manage, and maintain accurate records of the quantity of R2 controlled streams in the R2 facility's control from receipt through processing, storage, and shipment.
Tracking throughput, right? Mass balance.
Mm-hmm. So yeah,
this is almost like an inventory in-house though. At each step, it says processing, storage, and shipment. From receipt through processing, storage, and shipment. So in each of those steps, you have to record it because the R2 controlled streams change during that time. Like some stuff comes in as received and it's data bearing, right? And then at some point during processing, it becomes sanitized, or that sanitation was attempted and failed, so it's still unsanitized and going for destruction, or so I think that this is going to be easier for facilities that tend to focus on refurbishing and repair and reuse of electronic equipment, because a lot of those places have scanners to scan like serial numbers or other information into systems and know, but with this equipment, where it is at any given time, and might have like an ERP attached to that says what inventory is in house, where it's at, like, and all those things. However, for facilities that are doing waste, or primarily processing, doing material recovery, right? Mm-hmm. This might be a little bit more challenging unless they have some ability to do tracking at the time of sorting. It's going to be challenging. What do you do? Go around and determine each day at the end of the day. You have to take like you have a sorting area where you have bins that you've sorted out, and you don't really move them to storage for shipping until that Gaylord is full. And then you have to be able to know how much is in there. It seems like this could be a challenging requirement, but I don't know. I think we're going to figure out a way to make this work in smaller operations or operations that focus on material recovery. And it's like Maya said, we have to just define what we're doing. We define the process, so when the auditor comes in, this is our process for tracking those things. Yeah.
So,
and actually, Mike, even smaller facilities, so depending on how sophisticated you are, right? So like, for example, I would say that Siri is now kind of like, is actually helping these organizations get a little bit more sophisticated and maybe tracking, hours that it takes to sort something. So how do I say this? So for example, there are smaller facilities that at each station, they have smaller scales where they weigh every single, every single box or every single Gaylord output from that, or like at either at each shift or each day, and they put it in a Excel file, right? So now you have at the end of the day everything that you have processed and everything that now is going into that waste stream. So there are ways to do this. However, it's time consuming. So because it's time consuming, I would say that there is a great opportunity for clients, for organizations, for smaller recyclers to take the time that's spent in tracking this to use it as a key performance indicator to help them improve, right? So if you can now track how many man hours takes to sort out X amount of electronic waste, then maybe that's going to add into whether you're charging clients for service, or how are you maybe motivating your personnel to recycle faster and things like that. So there are actually benefits from doing things like this.
Mm-hmm. And,
yeah, I mean, go ahead, Asal.
Oh, sorry. And is it important to note that this is only with regards to R2 controlled streams?
Well, I mean, everything that comes in is first R2 control stream, right?
Right, but once I take apart like the plastic or the wood from a component from an electronic device, then does that become something that I don't need to track anymore, or track as detailed?
So your plastic is going to be added to your plastic bale, right? So in the end, you're still going to track how many pounds of plastic went out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's not going to be it's not going to go through different processes. It's just going to be recycled, separated. But for example, if you're also separating circuit board and hard drive, right? Now that hard drive has an additional step, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then the circuit board, actually, you have to remove the battery from it, right? So that has an additional step. With plastic, it's just the final step. It goes into your bale or however else you're packaging it, and it goes out. And that should be tracked in your mass balance already if you're R2 2013 certified.
Okay. Okay. So super section 2, for all electronic equipment, components, and materials controlled by the R2 facility, the R2 facility shall maintain total inventory levels below the defined limits in conformance with the R2 facility's legal requirements, closure plan, and financial assurance.
So this, I think has to do with making sure that they're not stockpiling a bunch of material. Mm-hmm. So legal requirements that might apply, there's like stackability limits on pallet height for safety under OSHA, and probably state OSHA requirements could be even more strict, as well as like fire department or high pile permit. If you have certain materials stacked above a certain height, then you don't have a certain rated sprinkler system to put out the fire, then it's not allowed by law. You have to have a separate permit. So I think this is kind of control the fact that, material with negative value, which is in the next section, could be stockpiled for a long time, and that could be an issue if you have your closure plan based upon double stacked material at a 50,000 warehouse with no outside storage. You only have, maybe you're saying that you can store up to 250,000 pounds, and then you have triple stacks and you have stuff stacked all outside, and there's 500,000 or 750,000 pounds. So there's no sufficient financial instrument in place to cover the cost of properly disposing of this in case of an abandonment. And when people tend to stockpile stuff, it means that there's negative value and it's costing them more to get rid of than that they paid for it, or that they got paid for it. So there could be issues there, and I think that is what the intent of this clause is meant to protect against.
Mm-hmm. So the total inventory levels can somewhat be defined by the organization, as long as it doesn't go against a legal requirement.
I think, in the closure plan, if you're saying that our maximum capacity is to be able to store this many pounds, this is based upon 2 pallets, pallets double stacked in these areas, no material stored outside, so on and so forth, then you can really just kind of do a quick check rather than do a full inventory to say, like, on your monthly facility inspection, you might say like, oh, our total inventory levels are defined below the limits in conformance with both the legal requirements for high pile permit, for OSHA safety of stacking of pallets, as well as our closure plan and financial insurance. So because your closure plan and your closure plan might state that you have pallets double stacked inside at this area and no outside storage. So if you can check that off on a box, during a monthly inspection, then I think that this is how you can show conformity to all the requirements here.
Okay. Maya, anything to add to that?
No, I think Mike covers it really good.
Okay. So section 3, for all electronic equipment, components, and materials controlled by the R2 facility, the R2 facility shall not store R2 controlled streams or materials with a negative value for longer than 1 year. So let's talk about this first, and then we'll get into the exceptions to this rule. So again, R2 controlled streams, we talked about what they entail, and then material with negative value, we talked about that. So this creates like more of a labeling requirement, right? Like accumulation labeling.
Yeah, but most of the time, a lot of these things would be considered a waste. So, I mean, the maximum you could probably store them is 1 year anyways, given like whatever type of regulatory requirements are applicable to that material, whether it's a universal waste or hazardous waste. So there's a possibility that like steel or plastic could have a negative value potentially. So I think that's because it says not store R2 controlled streams, or materials with a negative value for longer than 1 year. So, because other things have that regulatory requirement. So I'm just thinking of like what's not a R2 controlled stream and what's not something that's subject to universal waste or hazardous waste requirements that you could potentially store for more than 1 year that would have a negative value. So when markets drop, sometimes the things have negative value. And I think that's also the intent of adding the management of non-focused materials to try and recycle them or do materials recovery first rather than dispose of them, because some commodities could have negative values going forward in the future. We don't know.
So Mike, if I have capabilities to test batteries, and I can see that and I can say this battery, I've tested this battery. So I'm looking at 3A, right?
Yeah.
I'm going a little bit ahead of time. So if I have tested the battery and I can say this battery has 80% charge and I can resell it, right? Then I can store it more than a year because I have a testing record for it.
Yeah. That is true. If you can show that it's been evaluated and inventoried in accordance with the test and repair appendix, you could do that. Also, a negative value thing might be like broken pallets, mirror, wood from dismantling activities, some of those things that cost to get rid of that people could just stick in the corner of a facility. So this is, so there's not only more emphasis on the way that you're controlling the R2 controlled streams, but also just general materials with negative value. So I think this is something that is new to the R2v3 standard, is the emphasis on the environmental management of all material and stuff that's coming into your facility. You need to have a way to manage that and to not create negative environmental impacts through your operation.
So we jumped into the exceptions. So the first exception is if a component has been evaluated and inventoried in accordance with the test and repair standard, which is in Appendix C, which we will dive into more detail for that. And then the second exception is complete applications for regulatory permits or other authorizations for the export of the R2 control stream to be verified downstream vendor have been applied for within the usual issuing timeframe, but not yet received from the governing authority, and where storage is otherwise legally permissible. So let's break this down and kind of define what this means.
So this could be like for instance, it could be CRT glass, right? Maybe you're sending CRT glass, that just the panel glass that has been separated from the funnel glass and scrubbed of its phosphor and the frit removed, to a facility that's going to do some glass to cement or concrete usage, right? And you need to be able to export it to Spain or wherever it's going, and you haven't received, you've submitted stuff to get the regulatory authorizations, but it hasn't been approved by the governing authority.
Mm-hmm.
And then at this point, this material is considered like a commodity and not a waste because it's going into a product and it doesn't exhibit characteristics of toxicity. So it doesn't fall within certain universal waste or hazardous waste or the CRT final rule, whatever's applicable to that. So you need to make a determination, and some of this stuff is going to be applicable to your compliance plan, your how you're dealing with. That's why it says update, your compliance plan in accordance with regulatory updates, as well as your focused materials management plan. So how you're handling materials is going to affect this. So that, yeah, this is a very specific kind of exception here. Yeah. And I think that they wanted to be very specific to limit it to kind of legitimate kind of options where people are holding on to material for longer because they're waiting for government authorization to export the material, or the facilities waiting for import permission from the government in whatever country they're operating. But you have to make sure that storage is legal. So that means if it's a waste, universal waste, hazardous waste, and you're waiting to export it, you have to find some other option. You can't be like, oh, I'm waiting for something. It's not otherwise legally permissible to keep something unless there's absolutely no other option except to send it there.
Okay. Yeah. Maya?
No, that's, Mike is, he's our legal compliance expert on this, so.
Okay, cool.
No comments.
Okay, so the last section is talks about outbound equipment. So for all outbound electronic equipment, components, and materials controlled by the R2 facility, the R2 facility shall, 1, maintain bills of lading or other commercially accepted records. 2, ensure records have accurate dates, detailed description, including types and quantities, and customer or downstream vendor names. And 3, maintain a summary report of all transactions. So very similar to subsection A, which was a requirements for inbound components.
Yes.
Yeah, this basically mirrors section A. So you have to have the same thing. And I think what Maya said is really important, that the organization gets to define what they want to do to conform to 2 and 3, sub 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm. A and C.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's really, but the thing is, if you, again, it is in your benefit as a recycler to keep records of all of this for multiple reasons, not just R2v3, right? You want to keep the records, you want to be able to go back to them, and you want to be able to analyze your data, so to see how to use this data to improve your business, right? So this, standards absolutely are important for compliance, and to, getting in your foot in the door with your customers, right? But one of the things that we are really excited about is how can we use all of these new processes that you're adding and add to your business, right? So if you have the data of the inbound and outbound, and you see the data of how long it takes you to process from step A to B to C, then you can make informed operational decisions, right? Besides the point, should you, when you're audited, then the auditor is going to say, hey, do you have a mass balance of all of your material coming in and out? And then you'll be like, oh, yes, I do. And that can be either through your inventory or through your Excels, depending if you're a large organization or small organization. But yes, absolutely, we need to sit down, write out a process that's thoughtful for your operation, and see how best implement it to make the most value to you as a recycler out of this requirement.
Yeah, why not make these into something that's going to help your business rather than just paperwork?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of core requirement number 5, tracking throughput. If you have any questions about this or any of the other requirements, please email us at info@glenviewgroup.com, and we will see you for the next section, next core requirement, sorting, categorization, and processing.
Yay! Bye, everybody.